Good evening, I'm Laurie Johnson. Welcome to Houston Public Media's new web series, Political Perspectives. Every week I'll be joined by show commentators Aiyer and Brandon Rottinghaus to discuss all things political. Tonight we'll continue the conversation from red, white, and blue about the City of Houston pension issues. So let's get started, Jay and Brandon. First of all, what are some of the definitions when we're talking about things like defined benefits, unfunded liabilities? Let's just get down to the basics of what's actually happening.
Sure. So the City of Houston and most governmental entities run under a system, a pension system called a defined benefit system. That means that that you're guaranteed a certain dollar amount at the point you retire. That's different than, say, a 401k or an IRA that folks in the private sector use, which guarantees that you're going to be giving a certain amount of money in for investment, but it doesn't tell you how much you're going to get out, right? So that's dependent entirely on the market. One of the big issues they talk about is this idea of an unfunded liability that exists. So the city has made deals with the three pension groups, the fire, the police, and the municipal employees. And they're supposed to make certain obligations. The city has to contribute a certain amount of money. And so right now, if everyone retired, the City of Houston would be on the hook for about $3.2 billion. They've unfunded that, and that's an actuarial projection.
So it's not current debt, is what we're saying. It's not actual debt right now that we're carrying. It's just what could happen.
Right, but it's a real dollar amount that if it's not corrected, the city will left owing. But the big issue is it affects our debt rating, it affects our bond rating, and sort of the credit worthiness of the city, and so it has real structural sort of resonance in terms of how the city can operate.
The specter of Detroit and Chicago, who, especially Chicago, are in a position where they're having to lay off teachers and reduce a police force, which has caused a spike in the rate of crime, as looms large over the city. The city has other kinds of financial issues too, especially with respect to the revenue cap issues and not having enough revenue. They're already in debt by a certain $12 million we talked about, and this is a serious problem for the city that could potentially be on the line for ballooning payment for something like 30% of the general revenue. So the city has to be very careful about how they go about this. So this gets into not only the economics of the thing, but also the politics of it.
So this is a really difficult issue to resolve because of the politics. Nobody wants to be the mayor that takes away the police officers and firefighters' benefits. And no union wants to give ground for representing their constituents on providing benefits. So, I mean, how do you get to any sort of middle ground on this?
Oh, it's hard. Part of the problem is that it's not just the city and these public employee unions. We have an unusual system in that the state of Texas really oversees this process. So right now, the system is for two unions, for the police and for the municipal employees, we have a process known as meet and confer. So that on a regular basis, the city and these unions have to sort of sit down and talk. But once they're in contract, there's no obligation for subsequent meeting. The firefighters are governed entirely at the state level. So anything that gets worked out has to be done in Austin. And so that creates another specter. So there's no real incentive for the unions, once they've got a great deal, to go back to the table. So the governments, the local government, the city, is really sort of at the mercy of the unions. So they're pushing for something called local control and trying to get more and more control, which really means they want the city council to be able to run the pensions to some extent, the mayor and city council.
Yeah. This is a really good point and a really big problem because the city has to share responsibility with the state. The state is oftentimes reluctant to engage in these kinds of activities because there's a real political hot potato here. Republicans don't want to give ground, Democrats don't want to give ground, and in order to find some kind of common solution, they have to meet together. The other problem is that the legislature doesn't meet every year, right? You're going to have to wait for a couple of years between now and when the legislature next meet. The city has to balance 1-2 budgets, right? So this is interesting because you're going to have some kind of interim solution on these things that's going to be workable before they can get some kind of local control, if they can even get the legislature to agree.
So Mayor Parker has repeatedly sort of blamed this problem on the firefighters union. Is it really their fault? I mean, are they really just completely unwilling and to negotiate and willing to sink the city over their benefits?
Well, you have a difference in perspective, right? From the firefighters' perspective, they feel like, look, a deal's been made, we negotiated this, it's been passed, and now you want to come in and you want us to open it up and renegotiate. Well, when you look at the unfunded liabilities we talked about, both the city, for municipal workers and for police have a much bigger unfunded liability because the city has to contribute its contractually obligated amounts for the firefighters, and the firefighters look at that and say, look, we don't want to negotiate back down. You're not even going to you're not honoring what you're doing for police and municipal workers. Why would you honor it for us? So from that perspective, there's really no incentive for them to give ground. But what we do know is that the current system is structurally unsound, and so that we know there needs to be some form of reform. Just the question is kind of how do you reform a system like this?
You've had some interactions between the mayoral candidates on this question, especially between each other, but also in contrast to Mayor Parker, who negotiated some of the firefighters' rejiggering of the pension issue. And so that's been some points of contention because some groups are saying it needs to be fully funded. We made these commitments, and some are saying in order to save this, we have to be able to break it and we have to be able to renegotiate it. No one wins in these things. The problem is that there's going to be a solution that has to be met by both groups giving a little bit. So everyone hurts a little bit. That's probably the best way to sort of see the future on this.
So when you say everyone hurts a little bit, doesn't that also include taxpayers? I mean, aren't they part of the solution as well?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really
Absolutely.
Bad, yeah.
That's absolutely right. I think at some point in the day, you're going to see right now if they do nothing, the ultimate group that's going to fall on are going to be taxpayers. And because we've got limitations on our sales and some of our other revenue sources, it's really property taxes. Yeah. And because of RevCap, the way we're structured, we will likely would have to go to the voters to try to increase our amounts that we can actually generate. So something has to be done because, as we all know, no politician wants to go and ask for more money from the taxpayers.
And we saw Senator Betancourt and Red, White, and Blue talking about these issues. And I think that the problem is, the fear is that if it's the case that you start to raise the taxes, then you'll see businesses and people fly to the suburbs, and then the city itself becomes a sort of vacant hole and complicates their ability to raise new revenue. So the problem is sort of perpetuates itself. The solutions have to be very carefully drawn and have to have a kind of very narrow approach economically. Otherwise, you find one thing out of balance and all of a sudden the whole Jenga tower falls over. Because
you already have people feeling squeezed on property taxes as it is, and that's the one means of the city increasing revenue. You already find yourself at an impasse at the very beginning. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are solutions that can be done, but it's just a question of political will. I mean, I think the big issue is whether or not, if you view it as, we talk a lot about the $3.2 billion unfunded liability. The answer, to some extent, can be solved relatively quickly because it's not a hard debt. It's not a real debt. It's a projected deficit that you would have. So one of the solutions that has been put out there has been pushed out by this group, this Texans for Local Control, that has run TV ads and are trying to influence sort of the political process. And they're suggesting, look, have the control locally, and let's look at things called COLAs, cost of living adjustments, that are automatically built in right now for retirees and for current pensioners. So they want to get rid of that. If you get rid of COLAs, you have local control, you solve a good chunk of this problem. And so that's one of the potential solutions, and you're seeing it played out in the mayor's race. A couple of the candidates are advocating for it, and then one or two are saying absolutely not.
Yeah, this is a hard issue to get voters excited about because on one hand you risk scaring them because you talk too much about these things and it starts to look really grim. You start to evoke the specter of Detroit and violence in Chicago relating to budget issues. So people could become very excited very quickly. That's good and bad, right? It's good because people need to know what the problems are and vote accordingly, but it's bad because you don't want people to be overreacting to these kinds of things. So largely, the candidates have sort of skirted the issue. They haven't made it front and center to their campaign. They've all talked about it, and they've all got some kind of plan, that deals with it in some specific way, but you haven't had anybody who's really gravitated towards it. Steve Costello has been the one who's the most sort of likely to do that. He's been the most active on that issue, and the plan tends to be much more developed than some of the others, but they've all got ideas about how to fix this problem. Just a question, as Jay said, of political will.
So does this mean, kind of looking in the crystal ball, that these kinds of pension benefits are going the way of the dodo bird? I mean, can we expect in the future that police and firefighters should not plan for these pensions to keep them going into retirement?
No, I mean, I think you'll always have pensions, right? I mean, in the public sector. The question is kind of what the character of the way they are. In the state system, you have a hybrid system where you have the option of that defined benefit we talked about, and also a defined contribution, much more like a 401k. But the other thing is the defined benefit system really came into play when you had people staying as municipal employees for 20 years or 30 years. What we're seeing now is a character of the employees change. So folks are coming in for 4, 5, 6 years. We've got a much more movable workforce. So the idea of a portable plan, I think, has some appeal, just generationally. So that's part of the answer. But just kind of going forward, I think you'll see it. It just may not be in the current form it is right now.
Yeah. There'll always be something, especially because, like we said, this is a very hot political issue, right? You don't want to be in a position where you're taking benefits away from something, right? Especially Democrats who rely on many of these unions to be able to get out the vote. But Republicans are in the same boat too. They don't want to punish first responders who they have been allied with on several issues. So this is a difficult issue to get through at the local level because of the economics, but at the state level because of the politics.
Right, trying to get the Texas legislature to do something that's perceived as anti-police or anti-fire would be a tall order. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for helping me try to make pensions a little sexier. It's a really exciting topic. Thank you for watching this evening. Remember to log on to HoustonPublicMedia.org/perspectives every Friday night at 8 p.m. following the 7:30 broadcast of Red, White, and Blue. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Good night.